Yeah. Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Ketubot Daf Tzadi. Wishing everyone a Gemara Chatima Tova and a good fast. We are going to get started now with the bottom of Pei Tet Amud Bet. We saw yesterday was a case of two gitin, two Ketubot, all sorts of possibilities. Most of them were situations where the woman was married, divorced, and then remarried, and then either he died or he divorced her again. So either there's a get and a death certificate, or there's, not exactly a certificate, but proof of death, or there's two gitin. And the question is, could she collect two Ketubot based on that? So we said that she can only collect two Ketubot if she has two Ketubot, because otherwise we can assume the husband, right? Normally there's this assumption, he normally gives a Ketuba, continues the same Ketuba. He doesn't necessarily, when he remarries the same wife, and he hadn't paid her the Ketuba yet, he doesn't give her a new Ketuba, he just continues the original Ketuba. And unless we actually have a Ketuba in hand, and this is all based on previous Gemara where we learned that she could take her get, she could use her get to get her Ketuba money. So the question is, here we have two gets, can she get two Ketuba monies? And the answer is no, because we assume, right, one get, yes, allows you to get your Ketuba, but two gets doesn't, okay? Because we assume, right? By the way, about this ripping the get, I looked up, I forgot yesterday. The reason we rip a get nowadays is not because of the reason we saw yesterday. Okay, we rip up a get at the ceremony. So according to yesterday's Gemara, they ripped up the get once she got her Ketuba money so that she would be able to demand her Ketuba money again. Nowadays, we rip up a get because they don't want anyone to come along and find some mistake in the get and say you're not really divorced. So they rip it up right away so that there's no one who can come later and start making a stink and saying, oh, wait, this wasn't written properly, this wasn't this properly, and you're not really divorced. We want to avoid a situation like that, and that's why we tear the get. So even though both are talking about tearing gets, it's for two totally different reasons. Okay, so now, Tana Rabbanan, we're starting at the bottom. Hotzi'ah get uktuba umita. So she produces a get, she produces a Ketuba, and she says, and I was remarried, and now my husband died. So she wants to get two Ketubas. Well, it depends. In get kodem l'Ketuba. If the date on the get was before the Ketuba, then it's obvious that what? The Ketuba was from her second marriage. And therefore, with her get, she can get the first Ketuba payment. With the Ketuba, she can get her second Ketuba payment, because the dates make it very clear that in this case, he gave her another Ketuba for the second marriage. And therefore, govesh te Ketubot. Tuba kodem l'get. But if the date of the Ketuba is before the get, then it's obvious that if she doesn't produce a second Ketuba, then she can only get, based on the first divorce, the same Ketuba we can assume, right? She can get based on her one Ketuba that we can assume he reused the second time. I just want to make sure you understand this concept. This means a man divorces his wife. He's supposed to give her Ketuba money, but before he does that, he decides, I'm going to remarry her, and then basically just reinstates the Ketuba. So it makes a lot of sense. Okay, new Mishna. This Mishna seems to be connected to the previous because it's also about somewhere where something happens later that we assume is connected to something that happened earlier. So katan shesio aviv, we have a minor whose father betroths him, or marries him off. Ketubata kayemet. Shalmanat came kima. He's, let's say, 10 years old, gets married, gives her a Ketuba, but his Ketuba is invalid because he's not of age to promise any of these kind of things. But when he turns 13 and becomes of age, again, wherever exactly, in two simanim, then when he matures, he basically is still his old Ketuba that he gave then that didn't really have so much validity, now becomes valid. Likewise, ger shenitgaira ishto imo. You have a convert. He was married to his wife. Both of them were not Jewish. And then they both converted. And it's kind of like they got a new marriage, but they had a Ketuba. Now, why'd they have a Ketuba? Probably they just had some sort of financial arrangement, because that's really what a Ketuba is. The financial arrangement from before is still in place. Because when he married her the second time, Jewishly, the idea was that whatever arrangement we had, we're going to continue. Now, the simple reading of this Mishna is going to be definitely explained very differently by the end of the Gemara, to the extent that you're going to say, why do we even have this Mishna, which is what Tosfot's going to have. So we'll get to that in a minute. Amar Rav Huna, Loshanu ela maneh 200. Rav Huna says we're only talking about 100 or 200, the base obligation of the Ketuba. Aval tosefet ein la, but if he promised her, in addition to the 200 zuz, let's say she was a virgin, he promised her, she gets the 200 zuz, and then he promised her extra money. That's not going to be valid here. Okay. And then that really changes the whole meaning of what he means. Ketubot kayemet. Right. So according to Rav Huna, we're only talking about the maneh 200, aval tosefet ein la. Any additions she doesn't get. Now, according to Rav Huna, it's very difficult because then basically they don't even need a Ketuba for that. We already learned. Maaseh beitin. Anyone who doesn't give a Ketuba, they have a Ketuba anyway. So Tosfot says, according to Rav Huna, what on earth was the Mishna telling us then? So Tosfot answers that what it could be telling us is something like the following. When she got married the first time, how much does she deserve in her Ketuba? 200, because she was a virgin. Let's say, right, assuming she's been married for a few years, she's no longer a virgin. Now you're going to say the marriage really only clicks in on a Torah level when he becomes mature, which means that at this point, she actually is only deserving of 100. So what the Mishna is telling you is Ketubot kayemet, the details of was she a virgin or was she not a virgin, goes back to the beginning. Okay, we don't start the clock ticking from here. We start it from there, even though it's really only the T'nai beitin and not the Tosefet. Rabbi Yehuda, who makes a lot more sense, says afilu Tosefet yeshla. And that makes a lot more sense with the simple reading of the Mishna. The problem is going to be the Gemara is going to entirely reject Rav Yehuda. So we're ending with actually understanding the Mishna is explained like Rav Huna, which is really, she doesn't get any agreement they had before. It's really not so valid. It's just that she gets maneh 200 for whatever it was from the beginning of the marriage. Meitim. So here's our question against Rav Yehuda. It says, chidshu. If he adds something more once he becomes of age or once they convert, no tell it masha chidshu. Then she can get the extra that he promised them, which sounds like chidshu in lo chidshu lo. It sounds like she can only get more than the regular amount if he added something once they were married, which is not really true. Gemara says lo, ema af masha chidshu. You could say even. In other words, in the event that he added, let's say he added 200 in the beginning to the original 200, and then he added another 200 later, altogether she can collect 600. Explain it that way, and then it doesn't go against Rav Yehuda. But now the Gemara is going to bring a different braita that says clearly against Rav Yehuda, and that's why we're going to reject him in the end. But it doesn't say this. Chidshu, no tell it masha chidshu. If they added something, she could get the extra that they added. Lo chidshu, but if they didn't add anything, bitula gova 200 va'almana mana. Then a virgin gets 200 and a widow 100, and that's it. They don't get any extra. Tiyuv to Rav Yehuda. This really goes against Rav Yehuda, in which case they try to at least explain where Rav Yehuda got it from, which is the same reason we thought he was right, which is Rav Yehuda matnitin at ite. The language of the Mishnah confused him. Hu saval Ketubot kayemet akula miltakan. He thought Ketubot kayemet means her Ketuba, whatever he promised her in the Ketuba, is valid, still stands. Velohi, but it's not true. Ikar Ketubot kai. It's just referring to the basics of the Ketuba. And with that, Hadrat Alacha Kotev Lishto, and moving on to the next chapter. Mishaya nasui shtei nashim v'met. Okay, if someone's married, we're going to have two cases of a man dying and with two wives. So the first case is he marries two wives and then he dies. Harishona kodemet lashniya. The first, who gets, let's say he doesn't have enough money for both ketubas. So the first one collects first because she has an earlier date. She gets it first. Both women died then, the heirs of the first get before the heirs of the second. That's a pretty simple case. The next case is going to be quite complicated. Nasa, and it's going to lead to all sorts of complications at the later on. Nasa tarishona umeta. So now he marries. I see you're asking about a man katlan. This is different. This is he died once, right? And he, in other words, he's the one who died, not the women. So anyway, he dies, leaves two wives. In the second case, he dies in the middle. Okay, so let's see. Nasat rishona v'meta. First he marries her, then she dies. Nasat shniya v'metu. Then the second wife he marries. Doesn't really matter when he marries her, whether he was married to the first wife, wasn't married to the first wife, but he gets remarried. and metu, and then he dies. So now you have two things going on. This is what's going to cause all sorts of complications. What happens to each woman's Ketuba? So the second wife is presumably still alive, although we're going to talk about her or her Yorshim, or maybe even if she died before she gets her Ketuba, she obviously gets her Ketuba money because he died and her husband died, supposed to give his wife the Ketuba. The first wife died before the husband. What happens to her Ketuba? Remember? He inherits the Ketuba when she dies. And then in order, remember the rabbis instituted that in order for fathers to give big dowries and not worry that they'll say, oh, well, my wife's going to die, maybe my daughter's going to die first, maybe the husband will inherit her, then all his children, even from other wives, are going to inherit my dowry. So they said, Ketubot benin dichrin, this is what we say, the male children inherit her Ketuba. So how does that work? Her Ketuba first goes to her husband when she dies. Then when the husband goes to split up his Yerusha, he basically divides one portion, like the portion that was deserved before he gives out all of his estate. He's basically going to give the children of that mother the Ketubot benin dichrin, all of, right, whatever the value of her thing was. So to make things easy today, we're going to give an example to make it simpler. Okay, and through tomorrow's class as well. Let's just assume the first wife, which is going to turn into the Ketubot benin dichrin, is a 500 zuz Ketuba. Okay, he added, I'm giving a big difference just so that it's kind of, sometimes in extreme cases, it's easier to understand better. So she gets 500 zuz. Okay, that was her Ketuba. The second Ketuba was 200 zuz. So now he dies, and let's say he has 700 zuz in his property. So what's going to happen with that money? So it says here in the Mishna, Shniya v'yorsha kodmim liyorsha rishona. So the second wife, if she's alive, or her heirs, if she's not alive, right now, she would have to die after him. But assuming she dies after him, and then she has heirs, they're going to first get the Ketuba, because basic laws, right? Torah law is there's no Ketubot benin dichrin. So Torah law is she's right, her Ketuba. So she gets her Ketuba no matter what. So the first 200 zuz comes out of the estate, goes straight to, this is like what we call a Baal Chov. It's like a creditor. They're owed a debt. He pays that. Now we're left with 500. There's two options of what could happen with that 500. Doesn't say anything about the 500 in the Mishna. All it says in the Mishna is the second one and their heirs get the money before the heirs of the first. Because it mentions heirs of the first, the Gemara is going to assume that what are they heirs of the first wife means it's relating to their Ketubot benin dichrin. And then they're going to learn that in this case, the 500 then will go to the other sons. Okay, this is going to create a bunch of problems. I'm going to leave it for right now because the Gemara is first going to deal with the first case, but I wanted to a little bit set up some of the information because this whole thing of Ketubot benin dichrin, you're going to learn a lot of new things. It's a lot of information. So hopefully it will be clear by the end of today, and also tomorrow, the same concepts are going to be reviewed. So again, we have two cases in our Mishna, just to review, in case I got you off track. A man is married to two women, he dies, and now both of them need to inherit the Ketuba. So who's going to get first? The first wife gets first. Then, if he marries two women and the first wife, right? This is almost like saying the reverse, though, happens here. In a certain case, the second wife is going to get first. And that's in the case that the first wife died first, then the husband died, then the second wife has first dibs to her Ketuba because she's owed a Ketuba, whereas the first woman's Ketuba is already kind of gone. It's not 100% gone because there is this Ketubot benin dichrin, but that's only a rabbinic institution, and first really comes the obligation of the Ketuba to the second wife. Okay, which we will get back to and understand that case a lot better very soon. So the first thing they say is, a bunch of things we're going to talk about our language in the Mishna today. So make inferences from the language. So the first inference they try to make, we're going to see this exact sugya and the flip of it. There's going to be two versions of how to infer from the Mishna, the first case. It says, Harishona kodemet l'shniya. So someone's married to two wives. The first one gets before the second. Below katane harishona yeshla vashniya einla. Doesn't say the first one gets and the second one doesn't. Michlal, from here you can infer that the second one also has rights to the Ketuba. And if in fact she were to go and take the money, if she grabbed the money first, lo mafkina mina, we don't take it away from her. So if she demanded her Ketuba first and just took it, we wouldn't actually take the money out. There's a whole thing in Jewish law, which is a bit of a strange concept, but that once somebody grabs something, we've seen it before, right? And it's in their hands, we don't necessarily take it away from them. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It's always a debate whether we do or whether we don't. It sort of depends on how much of a right they have to the money. So now, Shmami, now what can you infer from here? So again, it's just an inference, not clear from the Mishna. In a minute, we're going to say you can't necessarily infer this from the Mishna. But because it says the first one has first rights to it before the second, but it doesn't say the second one doesn't have any rights, it sounds like if she were to take it, we wouldn't take it out of her hands. And let's say there's only 200. She took the 200, it's hers, and the first one loses that. We can infer from here to regular loans. If a creditor takes, right, you owe money to me and to somebody else, and I'm owed the money today, and they're owed the money tomorrow, and they go and grab the money from you today, okay, before me, even though I'm supposed to get it first, what they did is done, and I have nothing to do about it. I can't take it away from them. That's what seems to be inferred. To which the Gemara says, no, no, when it says she comes first, right, you inferred she comes first, which means she comes first, but the other one still has rights. No, she comes first means it goes to her and it doesn't go to the second, if that's all there is. And how do we know that the word kodemet could sometimes mean exclusively, right? She's the only one who has rights. Because it's not ben kodem lebat. Son comes before the daughter when it comes to inheritance. The daughters don't inherit at all. That shows kodem doesn't mean you can get later, or if you took, it's yours. No, if the daughter takes, it's not hers. She doesn't inherit. So there you see. Basically, again, it means the second wife still can get her Ketuba money, but only if there's enough, and she can't come and get it before the first. Now we're going to do the reverse. In other words, again, what we see here is it's not conclusive. It could go either way. And that's exactly what they're going to do the second time. So the second time is going to start with where the first option ended. Okay? Midalo katani, from the fact that it doesn't say because it doesn't say if she grabbed it, we leave it in her hands. Therefore, Michal, you can infer you can assume this one understands kodmim as she has first rights and the only rights. And if the second one were to take, it's nothing. That's the assumption they make. So in which case they would say, Shmamina, you can infer from here, if the second date creditor, the later date, comes and takes it before I'm due my money, that doesn't work. I can take it out of their hands. To which they say, no. No, you could say what they took, they took. But because it said the second and her heirs come before the first heirs, from there you can learn because it used that language, it also said the first one is before the second one, but not because, in other words, they had to say who comes first, but not because it was trying to say that you can't, that we won't take it out of their hands. No, you could theoretically say, you could theoretically say that it's theirs, okay? And they can keep it if they took it. We're just trying to say who's supposed to get it first. Next, Nasata Rishona. Now we get into the more complicated part of today's talk. Shmami Natzlat. So again, let's just go back and repeat that second line of the Mishna. If he marries the first woman, and then she dies, which means her Ketuba went and was inherited by the husband and only later will be inherited by her sons when the husband dies. And then he marries another woman, Nasa Shniya, and then he dies. Then Shniya, either the second wife or her heirs, if she were to die after that, get the Ketuba first before the Yorshei Harishona, before the second wife's heirs. Now, Shmamina Tzlat. We're going to infer 3 laws from here. Shmamina, echat b'chayav ve'echat b'moto, yesh lahen Ketuba panim dichrin, v'lo chashinan li'insui. We can infer from here, and this is the case we're going to talk about for the rest of today. Echat b'chayav ve'echat b'moto. This means if one dies during the lifetime of the husband and one dies after the lifetime of the husband, which is a possible case that was mentioned in the Mishna, right? Either she or her heirs. So if it's her heirs, that means she died, and she died obviously after the husband. So one died when the husband was alive, and one died after the husband died. That's echad b'chayav, echad b'moto. That's exactly our case. Now, in this case, what are we going to learn from our Mishnah? Yesh lahen Ketuba b'nin dichrin v'lo chayshinan li'insuye. The laws of Ketuba b'nin dichrin apply, and we're not worried about it creating a fight. Okay, let's talk about what the flip side of this would be and what fight would potentially be created that maybe we'd be concerned about, that we're going to see there's an opinion that says you don't get Ketuba b'nin dichrin in this case. So again, let's go back to our case where there was 200, there was 700 altogether. The husband dies and the wife is deserving of the Ketuba, the second wife. She dies, her heirs come forward and say, we want her Ketuba. So they get 200, nobody disagrees with that. That's clear. Now what's left? What's left is only 500. The sons of the first wife want to get their 500. Well, what's the problem? The problem is that while the first, okay, it's tricky who's first, second. The group of sons who collected first, which is the second wife's kids, they collected a Ketuba, so they got 200, but they got that as a chov. That means, right, their mother was owed money, and they inherited that. They're creditors, basically. So they can come and claim, if you take 500 as inheritance, you have to remember, Ketuba, right? So I want to distinguish. Ketuba, the Ketuba is a payment he has to pay. That's an obligation. Then Ketuba in dichrin is laws of inheritance. How do we divide up the inheritance? Well, when it comes to dividing up the inheritance between all the sons, we're going to give, right, your male children, the wife's male children, they're going to get more, let's say, because her Ketuba was higher. Okay, so in a regular case, for example, let's say one Ketuba was 500, one was 200, the husband dies first. All the women are supposed to get the Ketuba, but the woman dies. The opposite. The women both died first, and then the husband died. So now he has two Ketubot in dichrin on him, right? So he'll divide the money based on all the sons will get, they'll each get based on how much money their mother had. If there's money left, they'll divide it evenly between them. Now, the issue is this. There's a few issues. Number one issue is, in order to, Ketubot in dichrin is an institution of the rabbis, in order to prevent fathers from giving low dowries. They got rid of this at a certain point. Once fathers gave higher dowries anyway, they got rid of this takana. But for a while, this takana was in place, more like in the time of the Yomi. But before that, the takana was in place. When the takana is in place, there's a problem. Because you have to also have, this overrides Torah laws of inheritance. If, let's say, there's not enough money, and one group of sons is going to inherit all the property, then the other sons don't inherit at all. Now, the Torah says the property is divided evenly between the father's sons. So there's this law that there has to be motar dinar. In order to collect Ketubot b'nin dichrin, you have to have at least a dinar's worth of property or money to divide evenly between the brothers. If there's no evenly divided property of the brothers, then you can't collect your Ketubot b'nin dichrin because the Torah laws of inheritance haven't applied. Okay, I see you're asking about a bechor. I don't know how the bechor fits into this, but even the dinar, I guess, would be divided up by the bechor. Ketubot b'nin dichrin, I think, doesn't have to do with bechor, or maybe her bechor gets more. I don't think so, no. Bechor would only be the way the bechor would fit into this would be like this. Let's say the bechor of this father is from a different marriage. So when you have that one dinar that's left, or whatever that's left to be divided evenly, he'll get 2 portions of it and everyone else will get 1 portion. I mean, obviously you're going to split this dinar into almost nothing. It's not a lot of money, but the halach is there has to be at least something for there to have the Torah laws of inheritance apply. If they don't apply, you can't get Ketubot b'nin dichrin. Okay, so that's important to understand for this. So let's get started. Now, if we go back to our example, and there was only 700, and those took 200, and those took 500, forget about the motar dinar for now, we'll get back to that later. One took 200, one took 500. The 200 will say, forget about it, doesn't really matter how much they got, and maybe they got 500 and they got 200, it doesn't really matter. But they'll say, wait a minute, we didn't get any inheritance. First ones will say, what do you mean you didn't get inheritance? You just got 200 shekel, 200 zuz for the Ketuba. And they'll say, but yeah, that was a hope. That was what the father owed us because of our mothers. He owed the mother the Ketuba money. That was just an owing us. But we didn't get any inheritance, and that's not fair. How can you get all 500 of what's left? The 500 should be split evenly. That's the concern of fighting. Comes the Gemara and says, clearly the Mishnah is not concerned for this. Because what does the Mishnah say? And we're going to read it inside here. Mimai, from where do we get this? Midikatane shnia v'yorshea kodmim liyorshe rishona. Now, notice the words, the yorshim of the first. Now, what kind of yorshim? Heirs of the first. Heirs of the first means they're heirs and they want to inherit her Ketuba. So it says, mikdam hu dekadme ha'ika shakle. Yes, it's true. The second wife gets first precedence, but they get first dibs. That means the first one goes to the second wife's kids, right? The first money that's there goes. But if there's more money left, it sounds like the heirs of the first can get what they're deserving as heirs, which would be Ketubot benin different. Okay? Soon Rav Ashi is going to explain the Mishnah differently. But that's the first inference from our Mishnah. Because it sounds like after the 200 collected, they can collect the 500. Even if the other heirs might be left with nothing. They'll get no inheritance. Ushmamina. Now, what about the motar? Right? There was no motar in this case. Shmamina. Ketuba na'aseh motar lechaverta. Now, first of all, you have to notice the Mishnah never talked about an amount. Maybe there was motar, right? That's going to be another question on this assumption here. But they're assuming maybe there's the minimum that there is. And then what it means is the fact that the first one's got a Ketuba, that's already considered motar. In other words, what's the issue? Everyone has to get something by Torah law. They got something. Now it's true. It was an obligation. It was like a loan in a sense. He owed the mother money, but it doesn't matter. That's enough to be considered motar. If they got 200, the others can get the 500, even if there's nothing left after to be divided evenly, because again, this is going to be a subject of debate. But according to the Mishnah, the Ketuba can function as the motar. And then it's enough, right? We've had some Torah laws of inheritance. You guys got 200, we got 500. Everyone got inheritance. Mimai, how do we know this? Midelo katani yesha motar dinar, because it doesn't say that the second ones can collect only if, it's the second in order, meaning the first wife's children can collect only if there's a motar dinar. But first of all, it never said they could collect at all. Okay, it said the first ones, right? The second wife gets first, which meant that the kids of the first wife can collect as well. And it didn't say motar dinar, so it must be that the Ketuba could be a motar dinar. Okay, those first two assumptions are going to be questioned by Rav Ashi. Ushma mina, third assumption, Ketuba benin dichrin lo tarfa mi mishabdin. The obligation, the fact that you can get a Ketuba benin dichrin does not allow you to collect it from liened property. Okay, it's not connected to liened property. Why? Now they say something a little ridiculous. But if theoretically you could collect the Ketuba benin dichrin from liened property, well, you could say, okay, so the father's money went to the sons of the second wife for payment of a loan for the Ketuba money. Well, that money used to be in the possession of the father. It's kind of like liened property. The sons of the first wife can come and just grab it from them and say, hey, that was liened to our Ketuba, we get it. From the fact that they obviously can't do this shows that Ketuba benin dichrin can never be demanded from liened property. So Matkifla Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi now questions the first two assumptions, one by one. Mimai, where are you getting this from? Now, no one made mention in the Mishnah of Ketuba benin dichrin. Did you notice that? Right? I immediately explained it as Ketuba benin dichrin, as did the Gemara, but never really said that. You could explain it differently. You could say the opposite of what the Gemara inferred. You don't get Ketuba benin dichrin in this case. Because, again, why? Because we're worried it's going to cause fighting between them. Umay kodmim. So what does it mean? Yorshei harishona shniya kodmim liyorshei hashniya. What does it mean that The second wife's kids come first, right? They get their Ketuba. We assume that meant before the heirs of the first wife can collect their Ketuba in different. Comes Rav Ashi and he says, what are you talking about? What does it mean, could mean? It means first you take the 200 for the Ketuba. That comes out of the estate before anything. Then what do? What it means is then the second heirs, the second group, the first wife's heirs, can come and do what? Say we want to be part of the inheritance now, and whatever's left, let's say there's 500 left, is divided evenly between all the sons. Who said it's talking about Ketubot indifferent? Now, what made you think it? Well, the chitema, Yorshei harishona lamali. Why are they called the heirs of the first wife, if not that we're referring to what do they want to inherit from their mother? Ketubot indifferent. That's not a good proof. I did tana shniya v'yorsha taninami liyorshei harishona. Because it said the second one and her heirs, it then said the Yorshim of the first. In other words, it was talking about the wife and her heirs. So when it talks about the first wife's heirs, how to better mention them other than saying the heirs of the first wife, but it has nothing to do with Ketubah and Dichrin. It just means after we take the original 200 for the Ketubah, that the second wife's kids get the Ketubah because they're deserving of that. After that, everything's divided evenly between the brothers, and this doesn't even talk about Ketubah and Dichrin. So Rav Ashi rejects that first assumption. And they're going to now reject the second. No, you could say Ketuba does not count as a motar. You need 701, right? You need 200 for the first, 500 for the second, and an extra one in order for the group of the first wife's kids to be able to collect their 500. And motardina, you can say the Mishna is referring to a case where there was a motardina. The Mishna never said how much money was in the estate. They never talked about, right? All the assumptions we made before, we're assuming that's all there is. Who said that's all there is? Maybe there's more. And maybe it's just saying, first they get the 200, then they get their 500, and then whatever's left in the estate is divided evenly between all the brothers. Okay, so period. So he basically says you can't prove what you tried to prove, those two first assumptions. However, he says this thing of Achava Chayav, Achava Moto is actually a machloka tannaim. Okay, so while it might not be our Mishna saying so, or it's not clear whether our Mishna is saying it, but in fact it's a machloka between Ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva. Ditanya. Meitu Achava Chayav, Achava Moto. Okay, our Mishna didn't necessarily say explicitly, it was talking about that case. And Ketubah din Dichrin, but this is going to be much more clear, although even within this, there's going to be a debate. So Achava Chayav, Achava Moto. 2 wives, one dies in his lifetime, one dies after his death. Ben Nanas omer, Yecholim b'nei harishona lomar lebnei hashniya. The first wife's children who want to get their Ketubah din Dichrin can say to the second wife's children, b'nei ba'alat chovatem, you have an obligation to collect. Okay, get your chov. Tlu ktubat imchem, go get your mother's ketubah. Vitseu, and then leave, and then you're done because all that's left is for us, and you get no inheritance. That sounds pretty clear, like we get our Ketubah din Dichrin. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Kfar kaftzan lachalami lefnei b'nei harishona v'nafla lefnei b'nei hashniya. It's not the most clear line here. He says, okay, let's say it literally, and then we'll explain what he means. The nachala from the b'nei harishona, meaning what they wanted to collect their Ketubah din Dichrin, Kfar kaftza, it left entirely. V'nafla lefnei b'nei hashniya, and it went to the second ones. It doesn't exactly mean that, but what it means is they lost their rights to Ketubah din Dichrin in this case. Okay, there's no Ketubah din Dichrin. The takanat Ketubah din Dichrin was not instituted in a case like this. Okay, why? Because it's going to cause fighting. Because in this case, where the first ones, where there's imbalance, the second ones get a Ketubah, and you now want to claim your Ketubah din Dichrin, and they're going to get no inheritance. That's going to cause a lot of fighting. So as soon as they demand a Ketubah, right, and they get a Ketubah, the second group, that precludes you from being able to collect Ketubah din Dichrin because it's just going to cause fighting. Because the Ketubah is kind of a separate thing that they get, but they don't get any inheritance. And they're going to be very upset that they didn't get inheritance. And therefore, the whole institution of Ketubah din Dichrin was not for a situation like this. Ketubah din Dichrin was instituted when the husband dies after the wife, And, after both wives, let's say there's more sons, right? He dies at the end, and then we can, how is his inheritance going to be split up, but not when one is getting a Ketuba. Okay. My love. So now the Gemara explains. My love, is this not the root of the machloket? Mar savar chapachayav elchamoto yesh lam k'tupanin dichrin. Umar savar chapachayav elchamoto ein lam k'tupanin dichrin. Okay, that's what I just said. That's the machloket. So Amar Rabbi, eshkachtinu leRabbanan debei Rav diyatve v'kam. Rabbi says, I saw the rabbis in the house of Rav sat and explained this machloket differently. Dekule alma echat b'chayav echat b'moto yesh lam k'tupanin dichrin. Everyone agrees they get Ketuba dichrin. What's the machloket though? Hacha b'Ketuba na'aseit motar lechaverta. The machloket is, can a Ketuba, okay, now we're moving on to the second inference the Gemara had. Can a Ketuba be considered motar? So in the case where there's only 700, and the first ones collected their Ketuba of 200, and the other ones want to now get their 500, can we say they can get it because there's motar dinar, because the 200 that they collected is already considered like they got inheritance, or not? Okay? V'hu adin leba'al chov kamiflagei. And come the students of Rav and say, not only that, it will be the same thing if there's a ba'al chov. Okay, if someone's owed money from the estate, okay, so let's say, forget about, it's the same thing as a Ketuba. Let's say there's someone owed money from the estate. So right now in the estate, there's, let's say, right, there's Ketuba of 200, Ketuba of 500, and there's someone who's owed 200, okay? So, and there's 900 in the estate. So now, can we say that the 900 is considered that there's motar, okay? Or let's say, forget there were two, right, that there was a Ketuba for the other one. Let's say just one has Ketuba and dichrin of 500. There's this loan owed of 200 in the estate. So it's like a lien on the estate. Right? There's money they owe. And now the banim dichrins want to come and say, look, we're going to take 500. We're still leaving 200 in the estate, even though it's owed to someone else. That is enough to be considered motar. Okay? You could see that they're not exactly the same, because in the Ketuba case, sons are inheriting something. In this case, the sons will end up inheriting nothing. But according to the students of Rav, it's the same for Baal Chov. And Mar Savar, the other opinion says, Ketuba, right? This is Rabbi Akiva says, Ketuba naseit motar lechaverta. Ein Ketuba naseit motar lechaverta v'uadin leba'al chov. Rabbi Akiva says you can't say the Ketuba can be motar lechaverta, and that's why they can't get Ketuba dichrin in this case. That's why kaftsa, right? It left them, and there's no Ketuba dichrin, and obviously not a ba'al chov. V'amina lu'ana. When Rava says, I heard the students say this, I modified it a little bit, and I said the ba'al chov kuli amalu pligi dabi motar. When it comes to Baal Chov, everybody agrees that it's motar. The machloket is about a Ketuba. Okay? In other words, he disagrees about the Baal Chov. Okay, so that doesn't work. But when it comes to Ketuba, I think it would work. Anyway, he just didn't think that you should apply the same machloket to if there's a Baal Chov. Now, so again, we started with this machloket, trying to say Ben Nanas, Rabbi Akiva are fighting about whether there's Ketuba dichrin or not. Came Raba and said, the students of Rav said that this whole machloket is all about, can one Ketuba be considered motar for the other? That's the debate between them, and not the Ketuba dichrin, which basically means issue 2 that they said Shmami now that you can infer from our Mishna, not issue 1. Comes Rav Yosef and says, I disagree with you. Ela amar Rav Yosef, I disagree with you. He doesn't say why, but he says, I'm sure they're, oh, sorry, I skipped it. He does explain why. Matkefla Rav Yosef, I skipped a few lines. Let's go back. Rav Yosef says, Ihachi, Rabbi Akiva Omer Kfar Kaftsana Chala. The language of Rabbi Akiva doesn't match what you're saying. What should he have said? Im yesh motar dinar rebayale. Rabbi Akiva should have said, if there's motar dinar, then you can get it, and if not, not. If the whole thing is, can a Ketuba be motar dinar? Obviously, in many cases, there will be motar dinar. So he should have, if the whole thing is about the motar dinar, and whether the Ketuba can be considered that, or you need motar dinar in addition, he should have said that explicitly. The fact that he doesn't use that language, and he just says, Par Kaftana Chalaf from these guys and went to those guys, it's clear that that's not what he thinks, that it's not the motar dinar issue. Ela Amar Rav Yosef, again, it must be understood the way we understood it originally, that it's all a machloket about Ketuba dichrin or not. The last thing we're going to see for today is Hane Tnai Ki Hane Tnai. Comes Rav Yosef, and he says, not only that, but I'll show you another braita where they have the exact same debate. And this is going to be a big subject of debate in the next stop, which is we're going to see different opinions about whether this debate in this Mishna, we're basically going to say this braita that the braita that we're quoting right now doesn't necessarily mean what Rav Yosef thought it meant. Okay, so now we're going to read this braita. The time. Nasa ishto rishona v'meta. Okay, nasat ishto rishona, he marries the first woman and she dies. Nasat ishto shniya v'met who, and then he dies. Okay, same, right? This is the case we saw before, exact same thing. It's going to be a very unclear Mishnah. That's why you're going to see braita, which is why you're going to see there was a whole debate about how to understand this. Okay, this sounds like Ketubot in Dichrin, right? They get their Ketuba. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Im yesh motar dinar, elo notzin Ketubat iman, ve'elo notzin Ketubat iman. If there's motar dinar, then they can each collect their Ketubas. V'im lav, but if not, cholkin b'shaveh. Then, okay, after, now, obviously, the first ones are going to get their Ketuba. Sorry, not the first ones, the ones who are deserving it first. The ones of the second wife are obviously going to get their Ketuba. But if there's motar dinar, then they can go, then they can get their Ketuba in Dichrin. So now, and if not, they divide it equally. In other words, either, right? So again, there's two options. If there's motar dinar, then they get their Ketuba, the first, right, the second's wife. Then the first wife's kids come and get their Ketuba in Dichrin, and then they split the rest of the inheritance equally. But if there's no motar dinar, then chokim b'shaveh, after the second ones get their Ketuba, the rest of it's divided. That 500 that's left. If there's just 700, the 500 will be divided evenly. So now, is this not the same machloket? Demar savar Rabbi Shimon holds of chabachayav chabamoto yesh lehem Ketubot in Dichrin. Umar saval and Tanakama says chabachayav chabamoto ein behem Ketubot in Dichrin. And he says, right? 1 second. Just want to check one thing. Right, the way he explains it, 1 second, is a little differently. B'nai Rishona don't get the Ketubot in Dichrin. Right, the Rabbi Shimon is saying if there's motar dinar, then there's Ketubot in Dichrin, and Tanakama is saying they don't get Ketubot in Dichrin because Nasa banim b'nei shalzel achar mitav and olim Ketubat. Oh, sorry. Okay, I read it wrong. Okay, let's go back for a minute. I made a mistake. Nasa dishto rishona v'meta, nasa shniya v'metu, ba'im b'nei shalzel achar mitav and olim Ketubat iman. In other words, b'nei shalzel, only the second ones get their Ketuba. The rest of it is divided among the brothers. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, as long as there's a motar dinar, the first ones can get their Ketubot in Dichrin. Sorry that I read it wrong. Okay, so the Tanakama basically sounds like he's saying only the second wife's children are allowed to collect their Ketuba and not the first wife's. The rest of the money is going to be divided evenly. That sounds like ein Ketubot in Dichrin. And Rabbi Shimon says, as long as in motar dinar, there's Ketubot in Dichrin and they can accept it. So it sounds like he's saying there is Ketubot in Dichrin. To which the Gemara is going to now, again, going forward, we're going to stop here for today, is going to start saying, what are you talking about? There could be, since the language is really unclear here, there are going to be many possibilities about what exactly you could say is going on here. Okay, and then we're going to bring a whole bunch of other options to explain the machloka between Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon, which in the end is going to say there's not another machloka tannaim about it, but we're still left with Rabbi Akiva ben Nanas, at least according to the way Rav Ashi understood them, and Rav Yosef supported that, which is that there is a machloket about, there is a different. I just want to see one thing, whether it's really Rav Ashi who said it or it's just the Gemara saying it. Yeah, the truth is it's just the Gemara. It's not Rav Ashi who says it. The Gemara established it's a machloket tannaim, and then Rav Yosef confirmed that it's a machloket tannaim between Ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva, even though Raba and the students of Rab had a different way of understanding that machloket. Okay, so again, we started with saying, let's infer that that's true from our Mishnah. Then we said, not necessarily. Rav Ashi said you can't necessarily infer that. We tried to say maybe it's a machloket tannaim. Not 100% clear whether it's a machloket tannaim. Rav Yosef is further trying to prove it's a machloket tannaim from this braita, but he's not going to be able to do that either.
But maybe Ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva are really arguing about this. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Gemara Chatima Tova and a good fast.